Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Elven Council Precon from Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth and its face commander, Galadriel Elven-Queen, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which Precon upgrade we'll be covering next. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Galadriel Elven-Queen is a 4/5 elf noble that costs 2, a green and a blue, and has the following ability. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if another elf entered the battlefield under our control that turn, starting with us, each player votes for Dominion or Guidance. If Dominion gets more votes, the ring tempts us, then we put a +1/+1 counter on our ring bearer. If Guidance gets more votes or the vote is a tie, we draw a card. Breaking down her core stats, Galadriel is sporting a mid-weight CMC, an above-average stat block for her cost, and an ability that focuses around elves to generate us value either through the effects of the ring and +1/+1 counter distribution or card advantage depending on how the votes go. Taking a closer look at this ability, realistically, 9 times out of 10 our opponents will give us Dominion, which is arguably the worst of the two options compared to just giving us straight-up card advantage. Meaning, if we're able to summon an elf before combat, we'll be tempted once around and get to put a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures, which may not seem like a lot, and that's because it isn't. Even when considering all the benefits that the ring provides, we'll still see some issues, such as the fact that our ring bearer getting a +1/+1 counter is actively a non-bow with the skulk the ring provides, the loot effect it gives us on its second tick being probably the most useful effect it provides as a repeatable source of card selection, but the base deck really isn't equipped to take advantage of the graveyard setup it provides, and the on-block sacrifice and AoE life loss, while nice, are not exactly the most impactful effects, effectively making Galadriel more often than not a commander that puts a single +1/+1 counter on a creature with upside, which sadly isn't too impressive on its own. And to complicate matters even further, the Precon itself is very unfocused, containing elves but lacking the critical mass of them and sufficient payoffs for them that one would expect in a tribal deck, a big mana sub-theme that, while interesting, would be better served by its own build rather than being included here, and a vote sub-theme that, if we're being kind, lacks the support needed in our colors to be viable, resulting in a Precon whose commander's ability isn't that impressive to begin with, and whose deck can't even reliably take advantage of the utility she does bring to the table. So, now that I've sufficiently complained about how janky this Precon is out of the box, let's move on to how to fix it. Galadriel, despite my complaints about her overall power, does contribute, at worst, card selection and +1/+1 counter distribution to an already very powerful tribe, Elves. Elfball, after all, is a very well-supported and scary archetype in our format, but the mono-green variants traditionally suffer from overcommitting to the board and running out of resources, resulting in one bad board wipe typically taking them out of the game. By virtue of Galadriel being in Simic, however, that shores up that weakness quite nicely, allowing us to run plenty of sources of card advantage that can make use of the insane amount of mana elves can produce, as well as sources of spell disruption to ensure our boards stay intact against any board wipes that come our way. So, in an effort to salvage this Precon, we're going to do a hard pivot into Elf Tribal, cutting the big mana and vote sub-themes in favor of additional elves to more reliably proc our commander and synergize with themselves, ranging from tribal mana dorks we can use to generate us huge amounts of mana based on the number of elves in play, elf lords to power up our wide board of elves with their mere presence on the battlefield, overrun style effects to work alongside our lords to pump our elves even further, and just generically good elves to help pad our core stats. Then to support our elves, we'll be slotting in some big draw X spells to take advantage of all the mana our elves will be generating so we can reliably replenish our hands, alongside additional +1/+1 counter distribution and support to further power up our board and or to generate us value, resulting in a much more focused deck that can quickly assemble an army of elite elven warriors to overwhelm our opponents in the name of the Lady of Lorien. So let us make our way to Middle-earth yet again, this time into the vast woodland realm of Lothlorien, ruled over by Lord Celeborn and our commander, Lady Galadriel. Over a millennia old and being one of the most powerful elven mages who ever lived, the Lady of Light has watched over and protected Lothlorien with her powerful magics for centuries, amplified further by her Ring of Power, Nenya, preventing evil from touching her lands even against the might of Sauron's armies. But the time of protection is now past, for now is the time for the elves to go to war. With each of their warriors possessing hundreds of years of experience and knowledge on the battlefield, wielding armaments forged by the greatest master smiths of the realm, and being led by the Princess of the Noldor herself wielding magic dating back to the First Age, there is no force of savage orcs that can hope to stand against the might of the elven kingdoms. So, now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting off with our retained creature base, we'll of course be hanging on to as many of the base build's elves as possible to be able to reliably proc our commander and set the groundwork for our elf ball game plan. Beginning with the ramp sources Arbor Elf, Elvish Mystic, and Paradise Druid, all of which serve as cheap mana dorks who speed up and fix our mana base. Farhaven Elf and Wood Elves, which provide tribal land-based ramp to build up our mana base even further, and Elvish Archdruid, whose ramp that scales with the amount of elves we have in play can provide us with huge amounts of mana, and that's on top of being a tribal lord to power up our board. Then moving on to our kept tribal sources of card advantage, we'll be holding on to the legends Arrestor of the Council and Círdan the Shipwright, the former tacking on a scry and draw effect to whenever we proc our commander's Will of the Council to help us dig for more resources, and the latter providing continual card advantage as he ETBs or swings in, which also doubles as a way for us to cheat our other elves into play provided we're willing to give an opponent an extra card to do so. Reclamation Sage will then be joining us as a piece of in-tribe spot removal to help us deal with any problematic back row threats our opponents may be running, as will Elrond of the White Council, who is technically removal since he'll generally be stealing 3 creatures away from our opponents when he comes down, since our opponents are not likely to vote to make our elves even bigger with counters, though we'll still be able to do so with our vote along with the creatures that we've stolen from them. Then with our core stat providing elves covered, we'll move on to elves that empower their brethren so they can crash into our opponents as hard as possible, with Haldir Lorien Lieutenant retaining his position as both a mana sink as we cast him to load him up with counters, and as one we can activate to empower our entire board afterwards based on his size, granting all our elves vigilance when he does so to allow them to intercept any incoming crackback, and becoming even more dangerous as our counter distribution sources make him even bigger. Elvish Warmaster staying in as another mana sink that we can use to buff our elves that also puts more tribal bodies onto the battlefield as we summon our elves from the 99, on top of also granting AoE Death Touch to our elves to make trading with them very tricky, and our Windweaver of Hope staying in as well as another way to distribute counters to our elves as they enter play that only gets better alongside our tribal lords and +1/+1 counter distribution sources. And then as our final 2 creature carryovers, we'll be holding on to Elvish Piper, who is both a superb reprint and a way for us to cheat any of our elves into play at a significant discount, which we can even do on our opponent's turns to keep them safe from removal and to grant them pseudo-haste, as well as Elvish Visionary, who is a simple and cheap in-tribe cantrip that procs and benefits from all our tribal payoffs while replacing itself as it comes into play. Then proceeding to our kept instance, we'll open by retaining the removal spells Inscription of Abundance, which is a decent fight effect, and, if kicked, serves as an additional source of counter distribution to further grow our creatures and life gain to pad our life totals. Beast Within, whose flexible permanent destruction enables us to deal with all manner of permanent threats we may encounter, and the counterspell Swan Song, which is another superb reprint and a dirt cheap means for us to protect our hard-earned board states from wipes that would otherwise send us back to square one. Speaking of which, we'll of course also be hanging on to Heroic Intervention as yet another high-value reprint that helps keep our board states intact, this time from destruction and targeting for even more protection. From there, we'll then move on to held over instant speed tribal token creators, those being Windswift Slice and Galadriel Ambush, both of whom are easily capable of flooding the board with tribal bodies to enable and benefit from our payoffs, while either providing a one-sided fight effect that benefits from our Lord's Encounter distribution to create even more elves, or a tribal fog that makes attacking into us or blocking our attacks much more difficult. And lastly, we'll be wrapping up our kept instance with Growth Spiral, providing us with another relatively cheap cantrip that also has a high chance of ramping us to speed up our mana base even further. It's then on to our kept sorceries, in which we'll be building up our core stats a bit more by retaining the ramp spells Rampant Growth and Cultivate to beef up our mana base even further, as well as the board wipes Devastation Tide and Raise the Palisade, both of which provide us with a non-destruction way to retake control of the board, and either wipe everything away but lands to deal with any type of problematic board state, or instead leave our elves in play after bouncing all other creatures so they can continue to swing in. Overwhelming Stampede then also makes the grade as a superb finisher that empowers our entire board, benefiting greatly from our tribal lords and +1/+1 counter distribution to make the stat bump it provides even bigger, while also granting AoE trample as well to ensure that our elves' increased stat blocks are guaranteed to crash through blockers and get in for damage. And lastly, Genesis Wave hangs on to its spot as a magnificent mana sink that the final build can easily pump huge amounts of mana into, allowing us to churn through our deck and cheat additional lands, creatures, and other permanents into play to build up our board state even further. Our carried over enchantments are then up next, in which the only two that made the cut are Lignify, which is a very solid removal aura that is particularly good at turning our opponent's commanders into paperweights by making them useless while not destroying them, and Asceticism, which is another much needed reprint and fantastic at protecting our board from removal by granting all our creatures hexproof and by also allowing us to cheaply and repeatedly regenerate them on top of that. Closing in on the end now, our kept artifacts will consist of the Ramp Source's Soul Ring and Arcane Signet to provide an extra bit of ramp and fixing to speed up our mana base even more, the Equipment Lightning Greaves and Whisper Silk Cloak to provide our lords and high-value elves with targeting protection to ensure they can keep empowering our board or providing utility safely, while also allowing them to either swing in immediately or bypass blockers respectively. And lastly, the tribal equipment Lithorian Blade, which tacks on a one-sided fight effect to every attack we make, which again benefits from the final build's various lords and sources of counter distribution to allow our elves to remove the most dangerous creature on our opponent's board as they swing in before blockers are even declared. And finally, reaching our retained land base, we'll be holding on to the Mana Lands Command Tower, Flooded Grove, Hinterland Harbor, Rejuvenating Springs, and Divine Glimmer Snarl as dual lands that typically come into play untapped to provide fixing without sacrificing speed, as well as Exotic Orchard, which also comes into play untapped and can generally tap for at least one if not both of our colors off our opponent's lands. And finally, we'll be keeping the 11 islands and 15 forests from the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 68 cards, including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 32 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Beginning with our creature upgrades, which will consist of the majority of the changes to this build, we'll start off by cutting the sub-themes included in the main build to make space for additional elves to support the tribal game plan. For example, we'll be swapping out the big spell payoffs Radagast Wizard of the Wilds and Gandalf Westward Voyager, who would be much better at helming builds of their own, as well as Colossal Whale and Hornet Queen, whose only purpose in this build seems to be to enable them, and adding in the Elf Lords Leaf Crown Visionary, Imperious Perfect, Canopy Tactician, and Dwynen Guiltleaf Dean in their place. all of which empower our elves with their mere presence on the battlefield to make even the lowliest mana dork into a legitimate threat, on top of also providing additional utility to the build in the form of draw, token creation, ramp, and life gain respectively. Similarly, we'll be cutting Mirkwood Elk, whose tribal recursion is certainly useful, but a bit too slow for this build, and replacing it with Jiraga Warcaller, who serves as another elf lord that scales along with the mana we're able to pump into him as we cast him, and the amount of additional counters we can load him up with after he's in play, which, when considering the huge amount of mana generation and respectable amount of counter distribution we have at our disposal, can result in a truly staggering stat increase for our boards. Speaking of counter distribution, we'll also be adding in additional sources of it so we can grow our board even further alongside our lords, with a non-elf mana dork Wost Pathfinder being replaced with the in-tribe Zimic Guild Mage, which we can use to distribute counters on our creatures as they enter play, as well as turn excess counters into card advantage as needed. Celeborn the Wise and his scry-focused self-pump losing its spot to Master Biomancer, who provides passive counter distribution as our creatures enter play that only becomes better as our lords and other counter distribution sources make it bigger. Legolas Greenleaf's legendary focused growth and draw being benched in favor of Ivy Lane Denizen, who takes advantage of our relatively large creature base and token creation to distribute even more counters to any targets we wish, and Realm Seeker's impressive but ultimately unnecessary ramp being slotted out so we can slot in Immaculate Magistrate, whose +1/+1 counter distribution that scales off our elves can turn even our smallest elf into a double-digit threat at no mana cost. And then, to provide our elves with one last means to further improve their stats, we'll be replacing Mirkwood Trapper's lackluster power manipulation with Izuri Renegade Leader, who serves as a mana sink that we can activate multiple times to provide a tribal overrun that we can use to pump our board and crash through blockers, in addition to providing repeatable tribal regeneration to protect our lords and utility pieces, and shelving the useful but niche graveyard hate that Learn from the Past provides to add in Cultivator of Blades, which provides another sizable stat bump to our entire board every time it swings in that empowers our board even further as we power it up via our lords and counter distribution. Then, with the elf empowering side of the game plan covered, we'll move on to improving and adding in means for us to generate mana to get to and activate those effects in the first place, in which we'll be scrapping the Mana Rocks Commander Sphere and Model of Unity to add in the tribal mana dorks Llanowar Elves and Findhorn Elves, which are cheaper and benefit from all our tribal payoffs while still speeding up our mana base. The very expensive and somewhat unreliable Travel Through Caradhras losing its spot to Coiling Oracle, which at worst is another tribal cantrip and at best is an additional land drop on a tribal body, and the base build scry package consisting of Opt, Elven Farsight, and Preordain all being set aside so we can give their spots to Morrowind the Nurturer, Priest of Titania, and Wirewood Channeler, all of whom use our elves to produce truly absurd amounts of mana to fuel our spell casting and pump into our mana sinks. Then as we close in on the end of our new creature additions, we'll be making some improvements to our tribal token generation by swapping out the symmetrical token generator Sylvan offering, and the decent but unnecessary in this build recursion piece Seeds of Renewal, for the repeatable elf token production provided by Lissalana Huntmaster and Wolverine Riders, who deploy additional elves into play for us as we cast our elf creatures or passively on both our and our opponent's turns respectively, with the latter also padding our life totals with every elf that enters play under our control. And then as the last changes made to our creature base, we'll be improving our draw package by removing the 2 legendary focused Mirror of Galadriel and the 2 unreliable wheel Sail into the West, and adding in Beast Whisperer and Edric Spymaster of Trest, both of whom are much more reliable sources of card advantage in this build that take advantage of our large creature base as we cast and swing in with them. Then moving on to our instant upgrades, we'll begin by improving our removal suite by cutting the unimpressive stun spell Trap the Trespassers and the land destruction source with too much downside Field of Ruin to add in the counter spells Counterspell and Negate, which are much more valuable to us in this build to help disrupt our opponent's attempts to break our boards once established, which if successful may very well take us out of the game entirely. Then from there, we'll proceed to refining the base build sources of card advantage with ones that put our Elves' massive mana generation to use, with us cutting the middling draw spells Plea for Power, Mystic Confluence, Song of Arundel, and Lorien Revealed, as well as the random cycling land inclusion Lonely Sandbar, so we can replace them with the X spells Pull from Tomorrow, Stroke of Genius, Even the Score, Diviner's Portent, and a Transcendent Message, all of which at instant speed allow us to use the mana our elves produce to reload our hands and then some, shoring up Elf Ball's typical weakness of running out of resources very nicely, so we'll always have spells in hand to spend our mana on. And lastly, as our only remaining instant upgrade, we'll be swapping out the base build's other included cycling land, Tranquil Thicket, for the part draw spell, part AoE pump effect, Return of the Wild Speaker, which either takes advantage of our lords and +1/+1 counter distribution to reload our hands very nicely, or, if we already have enough cards in hand, we can use to power up our board instead at flash speed to enable even more powerful alpha strikes. Then skipping all the way to our land upgrades, we'll be terraforming the Gainland Thornwood Falls into the Painland Yavimaya Coast to improve the speed of our mana base, cutting the Tapland Woodland Stream to slot in Oran Reef the Vastwood, which provides easy to enable counter distribution to our entire creature base to make them even bigger, and swapping out the Colorless Ash Barrens for a basic island to give us access to more untapped blue mana that we can use to pay for our multi-pip blue spells, since the majority of our mana producing elves typically tap for green. So, now that we've covered all 32 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 37 creatures including our commander, 15 instants, 6 sorceries, 2 enchantments, 5 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 35 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 37 elves, 6 sources of elf tokens, 8 cards that care about elves, 6 elven lords, 6 temporary AoE pump effects, and 10 sources of +1/+1 counter generation and or distribution, giving us a well-supported tribal game plan that includes plenty of tribe members, a decent number of ways to generate value off of them, and a whole host of means to empower them so they can crack in for maximum damage. For general deck stats, we have 19 ramp sources, 13 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes. Our ramp being much higher than normal since elves are very good at generating huge amounts of mana so they can flood the board with additional tribal bodies, while our draw is slightly higher than average so we can replace the spells we cast instead of just running out of resources. Looking at our mana curve, we have 8 1-drops, 17 2-drops, 19 3-drops, 12 4-drops, 8 5-drops, and 1 6-drop, leaving us with a fairly low-to-the-ground curve that aims to get as many tribal bodies into play as quickly as possible to empower our Elves Matter payoffs, then using our commander and draw sources to help dig for even more elves and sources of elf token production to further build up our board, more elven lords and counter distribution sources to power it up, and finally, finishers that we can use to power up our board to absurd levels and knock out our opponents in one fell swoop. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.30 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping, and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, Boiling Oracle's cantrip and potential ramp can be traded out for Taunting Elf to provide us with a means to make the rest of our board unblockable when alpha striking in, or, when combined with making it our ring bearer with at least 3 ticks on the ring, turning it into a pseudo board wipe by forcing our opponents to sack all the creatures that are forced to block it. Transcendent Message's scalable draw can be exchanged for Elven Ambush to build up our board with more tribal tokens at instant speed, and Return of the Wild Speaker can be traded for Kamal Heart of Krosa to give us a more reliable overrun style effect that grants trample, and a mana sink that animates our lands for even more damage instead of the draw its predecessor can provide us. Then for further upgrades, a Restore of the Council can be cut for Realm Walker, whose Elf Sight provides us with a less symmetrical draw effect by letting us play our tribe members off the top of our deck, Círdan the Shipwright can be benched for Elvish Harbinger to give us the means to tutor any of our tribe members directly to our hand that serves as a mana dork afterwards. Elrond of the White Council can be sidelined for Elvish Champion, who is yet another tribal lord we can make use of that also provides board-wide evasion via its Forest Walk granting, which is likely to be relevant on most tables against at least one opponent. Elvish Visionary can be traded out for Allosaurus Shepherd, who allows us to play through spell disruption by preventing itself and all our other creatures from being countered, on top of also providing a solid AoE stat bump that we can pump mana into to Alpha Strike in with, and Cultivator of Blades can be slotted out in favor of Craterhoof Behemoth, which is a classic elf tribal finisher that takes advantage of our typically wide boards to provide a massive stat bump as well as trample to close out games. And for one last change, I was thinking we can swap out Diviner's Portent for another draw source that takes advantage of our large creature base, preferably repeatedly that also provides +1/+1 counter distribution as well to fit with our counter distribution game plan. Perhaps one that also takes advantage of our lords and existing counter distribution to make itself cheaper to cast, as well as providing ramp and life gain for good measure. But where oh where would we find such a card in green, I wonder? Oh well, a mystery for the ages then. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. With the Elven Council Precon upgrade complete, the next and final Precon we'll be covering will be the Hosts of Mordor Precon and its face commander, Sauron, Lord of the Rings. So look forward to a Reanimator build featuring him coming soon. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the cut-rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.